It's great to be working with everybody in this panel today. This is a really very, very knowledgeable group. It's somewhat humbling in the prep sessions to hear the level of knowledge they have. So I know there's going to be a lot of great things today. And Carol, thanks for the introduction. Why don't we have introductions quickly from each person in the group before we start?
Are you going to call on us, Nick?
Sure, go ahead, Elizabeth. You go first.
I guess I would say that I entered the regenerative agriculture space about 18 years ago. I had had a long career in the wine industry, and I went to work for a winery in Sonoma County, California called Quivira Vineyards. And we transitioned that estate from conventional to organic and then to biodynamic. And over the course of working there for 5 years, we just were really impressed by not only the agronomic improvements on the estate, notable increase in product quality, and then also just a profound connection that the team had working with the farming method. And so that led me to work for Demeter USA, which is the nonprofit certifier of biodynamic farms and products. For those who don't know about biodynamic, you can just consider it a very comprehensive form of organic and possibly the first form of regenerative agriculture. And I left Demeter a year and a half ago as president, and I have been consulting in kind of that, where the intersection of agriculture, food, and climate.
Great. Michael?
You're on mute. There we go. Figure out the mute button. Thanks, Nick. Great to be here. Mike Miille, I'm the CEO of Joyn Bio. We're a 50-50 joint venture between Bayer and Ginkgo Bioworks. And we were formed with the idea of coming up with sustainable solutions for ag that really focus on the plant microbiome and leveraging microbes and their importance in plant health and plant growth and plant protection, but also bringing in the synthetic biology arm of Ginkgo Bioworks to optimize those microbes for new and innovative solutions. Our lead project is around nitrogen fixation, and we're very focused with our R&D around both sustainable solutions that will support growers at a product and technical level to be both more sustainable and to contribute to this regenerative ag movement out there that really has sort of sustainability, but also, you know, long-term food production at its core.
Thanks, Michael. Go ahead, Scott.
Thank you. I'm Scott Lively. I'm the president of Raise American. We are, I would say, arguably the largest grass-fed organic integrated beef company in America. We work really close with producers in the fact that we put deposits on cattle and help them finance their operations. But we own our own packing house, and we sell mostly private label grass-fed organic beef. I've got into this business in 2002, right before the USDA offered a standard for organic. And then it took me about 10 years to realize that we needed to do more than labeling and branding. We needed to do more than just have the claims, that we actually needed to create a biodiverse and the idea of a regenerative practice at a commercial level kind of became a dream for us. So we're working with huge producers, and nothing against the small family farm and the local farmers market, but we're feeding the masses here. We're in Costco and Ahold and doing large scale product. But if we could start stepping those cattle production programs towards regenerative agriculture, which all starts with soil, and we talk about all the time the supply chain and the life cycle of an animal going from genetics to a cow-calf organization to a feed yard to a processing to a further processor to whatever. There's a unique little supply chain within the idea of a biodiverse soil, just the idea of that soil being healthy and plants growing and feeding it, and then the cattle being healthy and then creating nutrient-dense foods. So our whole idea and theory is that it starts with the soil, and that affects the cow, and that affects you. And we are trying to do more than just market and brand that. We're trying to change macro beef processing to take a hard look at this, that it's possible. At the same time, other methods of reducing methane and carbon output from cattle by using things like dehydrated seaweed pellets and stuff that reduce the amount of methane cattle put out. So that's what we're about.
Thanks, Scott. And I'll just say quickly, at Whipstitch, what we do is we work with branded product companies only in the better for you space in raising institutional capital, call it $10 million and higher, and selling when they want to sell. And our real tie here to regenerative agriculture is more and more the brands, as they're looking at their white space and their mission and differentiating eventually from the large legacy brands when they sell, are doing more things in their mission, incorporating more sustainability into it. And this is, we're also very passionate about sustainability at Whipstitch. So that's kind of our tie. So I think to start
thank you
off,
for moderating. And
thank you.
The one and only thing I had in common with the previous speaker, Chuck, was we both believe that plant-based cheese has a huge role and yet to be played. Other than that, I think we're on polar opposites of the industry.
Well, I think it would be great to start just by hearing everybody's thoughts on defining regenerative agriculture. I know the first time that I heard the word, I Googled it, and I was, met with about an 80-page thing that I felt like I needed a PhD to understand. So I would love to hear everyone's thoughts. Maybe Elizabeth, start.
Sure, Nick, thank you. Well, let's just start by saying that there is no legal definition for regenerative agriculture in the marketplace, and there never will be. So because of that, a lot of different people are defining it in a lot of different ways. Some people believe strongly that regenerative should include organic. Other people believe that it shouldn't be limited to organic. There just was a launch of the Regenerative Organic Alliance, which uses the NOP standard, the organic standard, as its base. And then it has more extensive requirements around fair trade issues, around animal welfare. You have brands like General Mills that are coming up with their own in-house definition for products that they're developing sourced from a more regenerative supply chain. But I would say this, that any concept of regenerative wants to move to a more closed system ideal. And while no farm ever meets that ideal, it is definitely worth striving for. So a truly regenerative agriculture really is one in which all the natural resources that we use to produce food get renewed in the process of using them. So for example, solutions for fertility, disease, pest, and weed control, you want to have come from the living dynamics of the farm system instead of being imported from the outside. There, as Scott said, I love it, there's a laser focus on soil health, on biodiversity. And I would like to say that really, truly regenerative farms not only produce the most delicious and nutritious food and ingredients, they are also carbon sequestering farms. They're farms that fare best when we deal with issues in climate adaptation and mitigation. I will leave the definition with this, though. My favorite consumer definition that's less than 10 words is that it's farming in harmony with nature and community.
Like that.
I like that. Scott?
I think that's a great definition. I knew reading everyone's background that I'd be in over my head in this panel, but I'll say that I'm going to speak purely from a livestock point of view and not really from a crop or any other point of view. Is that, as I said a little bit earlier, that soil health is everything. And I think people forget that most commercial livestock and most commercial farms of whether you're producing alfalfa hay or you're producing cattle, they have this understanding or this innate feeling that soil is just dirt and some compost, and not understanding that there are millions of microorganisms living in that soil, and it is a very complex system within itself. It's a living, breathing thing. And that if we really want to eliminate all the additives that we put into soil to make it productive, that we've got to really rethink what it is as a whole, that the soil's not just dirt and some compost that needs to be maintained. It is actually in a small cup, there are millions of microorganisms living in healthy soil, and how to keep those alive. It's a lot like your gut. It's like your stomach. You've got good bugs and bad bugs, and you have an entire ecosystem within your stomach that helps in digestion. Soil is so similar that it has so much going on inside that soil that the hay or the grass that it grows has a health value, has a nutrient level. And we talk about nutrient-dense foods. Well, what makes it nutrient-dense? As I said earlier, is the soil, the grass, and then the cattle, and then eventually the consumer, whoever consumes that product. And I really think that what we forget about just talking about soil alone is the bio supply chain within soil itself, and how important it is to create food for the livestock and then for the people. And I think that as large scale cattle producers, which is our mission, start to really focus on not just adding to the soil, but maintaining the soil and treating it like, it's interesting to watch how they treat the plants really well. They treat the cattle really well. There's humane handling. There's no pesticides and herbicides, but the soil, it's got the same need. And as we can turn the focus of commercial farming on soil conservation, soil improvement, from all the things that's been done to it over the years, I think you're going to see a much stronger play for American grass-fed meat, and livestock will be healthier and people will be happier. And I think as people consume less, let's face it, they're going to be consuming less crap meat. They're going to be consuming better meat. They're going to be, the idea of throwing down, the indulgent steak might change a little bit. But I think that as people look for brands and quality and read ingredients, it's not just going to be the back of the label and what it has in it and the amount of fat and the amount of preservatives. It's like, well, what grew this? How did this get to my table? And I think that's going to be the focus of consumers in the next 5 to 10 years.
One follow-up just before we get to another question here. Elizabeth, you had mentioned organic and regenerative organic. I would love to hear if, just because I know the consumer has taken a long time to understand organic, and it's been kind of a slow growth of the past few decades. Is there a synergy between organic farming and regenerative farming, or how should people think of that? As if you're a founder of a brand, do you want to do both? Is that better, or you know what I mean?
Well, I think true organic farmers would argue that organic farming is regenerative farming. The issue is that over the years, the legal requirements to label organic have become so much narrowed and so much influenced by marketplace forces that there are people that even carry the organic certification that don't feel that it goes far enough. So I think regenerative and the growth of regenerative in some ways reflects, I don't want to get in trouble here, I won't call it a failure of organic, but certainly a lessening of the belief that organic delivers on the farming side like it should.
I'm gonna agree with that, and I'm gonna add to that, Elizabeth, that I think what's happened is when the USDA organic standard came out, in the early 2000s, and we could put it on anything, that it became a brand within itself, and it became so focused, how do we get this on a CPG package, and not, well, what does it mean behind the supply chain? What had to happen for me to put that on there? But how do I make that label claim? And I think that's where I think we get into a really slippery slope of how many label claims are out there and what's true behind them.
So it's safe to say that farming organically alone improves soil health to some extent too?
If it's done properly.
I would say, Nick, that farming organically means that you haven't used those prohibited inputs. Fundamentally, organic is really more about what you don't do. So if you're not using those synthetic inputs, fertilizers, pesticides, you're eliminating the use of GMOs, that's always a good thing. Sorry, Michael, that's most of the time a good thing. So I just want to say that, but regenerative is more about what you do versus what you don't do, if that makes sense.
It's a great distinction.
The best part about it's what's not in it. I like that one.
Yeah, I think that's a distinction that needs to be made, because I think it's hard to understand the two. Michael. You were going through your microphone.
Maybe a little different perspective. Certainly agree with the definitions of Scott and Elizabeth, and I think where we interface is really with the grower and with the challenges that growers have out there, not just to produce the food, but also to do it so that they can stay in business, so that they can make a profit. I mean, a big part of sustainability in farming today, part of that is looking at the soil and the land, and that's a critical piece. But we also need those growers to have practices and cost equations that allow them to stay in business and be sustainable. And I think this is really where we come in, is trying to provide innovative solutions that allow those growers to not only, historically growers have focused or have used synthetic chemistries, and there's been a huge focus on just performance. Does my product kill the pest, or does it, prevent a specific disease out there that's ravaging through their crop? And now what's happened, I think, in the last 10 to 20 years is an increased focus on not just performance, but also providing innovative solutions that allow that grower to focus on that soil health that Scott was talking about, to look at that soil and how it contributes year in and year out to the health of that plant, without the chemical inputs, right, that are currently needed. And the biggest one there is synthetic fertilizer. This is the the dilemma everybody's in. If you take away synthetic fertilizer, you just don't get the yields anywhere close to the yields that we need to hit the productivity that we do. But we also know that it's not sustainable, both the production of that synthetic fertilizer as well as the runoff and the impacts. So what do? You have something that, doesn't work long term, but you can't take it away. And that's where one way we're coming in is trying to use microbes to come in and say, hey, what if that microbe can fix the nitrogen for that corn or cereal plant, much the way we do for legumes? And then that grower can reduce their synthetic fertilizer input by 50% as a start toward, a more sustainable or more regenerative farm and soil complex that's down there. So again, we're, when you're in the front lines of innovation, not everybody's always going to agree, and you're always pushing the boundaries. You're pushing boundaries in terms of social acceptance. You're pushing boundaries in terms of regulatory, but it really moves that whole world of science forward in terms of trying to find better and better solutions for those growers to produce better and better food.
That's a great point, Michael. We're talking about how do you improve soil quality there. Scott or Elizabeth, any thoughts on improving soil quality?
Yeah, I mean, and again, everything I come at from a livestock perspective and a little bit of a crop for feed perspective, not a crop for humans. So, the idea of cover crops is huge. There's a lot you can do with cover crops that will allow a moisture to stay in the soil. Having a no-till policy for your pasture land. If you go back, conventional 15 years ago, the idea of pasturing cattle was just a necessity. You had a cow calf with a backgrounder, and he was this glamorous guy on. You imagine the rancher, large plots of land, and he would just put cattle out there, and they would essentially just graze from spring to fall until it was gone. And then when the grass is gone, they put them back on feed. Once they're back on feed, you're hand feeding them in a trough and you're hand feeding them. But the idea of no tilling actually adds moisture to the soil. The moisture obviously grows roots. The roots actually grow whatever crop it is, whether it's a food crop, a feed crop, or grass for the cattle. And that allows erosion to stop. When the roots are in deep and the roots are strong in moist soil, that's what creates it. And I think that right there is the definition of regenerative cattle farming.
And what I would add, Nick, is that what folks need to understand is every farm is a unique individuality. And each farm starts with strengths and weaknesses. And so there aren't one-size-fits-all solutions to farming. And I think the idea is to really support the farmer on their journey, because farming isn't a destination, it is a journey. and to find ways to be supportive of them to move towards a more regenerative model, whatever that means for them. The reduction of inputs to the farm is part of that. You know, as Scott has said, the incorporation of livestock can really help, but not all farms have the capacity to do that, both from an infrastructure standpoint and animal welfare standpoint. But the idea is to really focus on soil, and I think we have to change our notion of farming from farming crops to farming soil. And when we really focus on farming soil, it changes some of the decision making. So I'll give our audience an idea. When you increase the organic matter in soil by just 1%, that changes the capacity of the soil to hold on to water by 20,000 gallons an acre. So soil conservation is also water conservation. Soil conservation also allows crops to have more resilience in these times of extreme weather events. It provides livelihoods for small shareholder farming. You know, what we want to move for more is getting away from monoculture and moving into diversity, because diversity creates a more robust system than just growing one or two crops. So there's lots of different tools in the farming toolbox, and the ones that help farmers farm better are the ones that are appropriate for that particular farmer.
Great points, Elizabeth.
I'd like to add one point about the appropriate for that farmer, but it's also appropriate for the specific geographic area of the farm, because not all farms are created equal. You take the rich grasslands of Missouri, the panhandle of Texas, Eastern Ohio are vastly different ecosystems. And what I think, and I'm sorry to monopolize the conversation, what I think is going to be an interesting measurement is how biologically active is your soil. It used to be you get an agronomist, test the soil, is the carbon, is the nutrients, what's in it, but how biologically active is it? And that's going to be a huge thing. And I think also what's going to encourage people to do more of this, the organic side, is to, and I don't mean dumb it down because the producers aren't smart, but let's desensitize people to these big words, like we say, rotational grazing. We'll just listen. Cut your ranch into different sections. Don't let them eat it down to the roots, and then move them. Make it real simple for these people so they know, if I do this, I'm helping my soil, I'm creating value, I'm making more money, and I'm creating a healthier product. Those are the kind of things I think just simplify it for everybody.
So Elizabeth, safe to say we have 900 million plus acres right now of arable land in our country, and the population's growing. The world population is going to be, 11 billion at some point, around 2100. We're already having water shortages in areas like California. 20,000 gallons an acre, that frees up a lot of water for other uses.
Mm-hmm. That's right. It really does. And that's why you see a lot of, like in the wine industry, you see, especially in Northern California, where drought is becoming a way of life, you see them moving to no irrigation farming. But the way that they do that is through their management of soil.
Michael, so thinking about soil, it seems to all be coming back to that. Do you feel that, soil is the key to kind of feeding the world? And, what would you say about that connection? So, the amount of soil we have and limitations on population.
No, I think definitely, and I think it, obviously it's soil, it's water, it's all the inputs for a plant to grow, and in that area, to me, one of the big challenges in all this is how much change is happening so fast in a lot of these because of climate change and stuff. And so practices and things that worked 20, 30 years ago are changing faster than we can come up with new solutions. And I think this, to me, is going to put huge pressure on the whole agriculture industry to speed up. I mean, a new product, a new solution in ag today typically takes 8 to 14 years to get it out there to a grower. But things are changing much faster than that. So I think, yes, it's about the soil, but it's also about the tools, all the different tools that grower has in his toolbox to address the challenges, whether it's pest or it's disease or it's drought or it's abiotic stress. All these things are coming at him at the same time that the regulatory industry is pulling things away. And at the speed that the new innovation's coming, there's just nothing there to replace it. And I think, the one thing to me that comes out of this whole pandemic experience, right, is if a need is great enough, can you move innovation faster, right? And the answer is yes. And I think at some point, the ag industry is going to have to wake up and look at ways to provide faster, better solutions to those growers if we're going to try to keep up with the rate of change and the rate of that the challenges are coming at them.
I just want to add a note of caution to that, because I want to say, and these are competing issues that we have. One of the big issues that we're confronted with is that we're losing our topsoil. The world grows about 95% of its food in the uppermost layer of soil. So according to the UN's Food and Agricultural Organization, the FAO, a third of the world's soil is now moderately to highly degraded. And it's largely a result of intensive conventional farming. Some studies, and some people have probably heard this, some studies conclude that we have about 60 years of topsoil left. So, combined with the fact that 40% of the world's land has already been taken over by agriculture, bringing more land under production, it has a lot of problems because it destroys carbon sequestering peatlands, forests, rainforests. Of course, there's negative impacts to biodiversity. There's the increasing use of pesticides. We've already talked about that. The increasing use of fertilizers, which contribute more to greenhouse gas while polluting our air and water. So we have these tensions between these factors. And to me, what we really have to focus on is improving the soil. And I'm sorry, I'm just continuing to say the same thing over and over, but it's absolutely true. We have to work with the farms and the farmland that we already have, that's already under agricultural production. And we have to increase the ability of that soil to produce more food. And we can do that by supporting the farmers that are bringing these crops to market.
And maybe just to build on that, I go back to what Scott and Elizabeth both have been talking about, this idea of the microbiome and how critical the microbial population is in that soil. When we say soil, right, what is that? And whether it's the topsoil or the environment that those plants are being grown in. And I think what people have to understand is that we are just at the very, very early stages of even understanding how that microbiome works and what it can do for us, whether it's in human health, whether it's in animal health and gut health with animals, or whether it's in the soil with plant health. There are billions of these little microbes in every teaspoon of soil you pick up. And our scientific understanding of how they interact and how they work and how they can be harnessed, or I love the last week, the harmony example, how you put these things in harmony to optimize them for that farm or that plant or that particular crop. We just have to appreciate how early we are in that understanding, and it's exploding, and the tools and technologies of genomics and such are feeding that, but we just have so far to go, and that's the exciting part, to understand those interactions. And I think the soil with that microbe is going to be the key to a lot of these solutions we're looking for.
And then I just want to add the other side of the same coin is eliminating food waste. And it's a tangential topic to this conversation, but it's a very important one. I mean, over 1/3 of the food that's produced globally goes to waste. I mean, we can imagine an area larger than China that's producing food that's never eaten. And the annual value of that food's over $1 trillion. So all of the world's nearly 1 billion hungry people could be fed on less than a quarter of the food that's wasted in the Western world. So that's another issue that we really have to focus on. And, half of that food waste takes place in people's homes.
The other half takes place at restaurants. I get very frustrated with what they throw out. No, I agree with you. It's about how we manage the soil, how we manage the supply chain, and then it's also about how we manage the shelf life and the preservation of the food so people can actually get it. There's got to be some type of mechanism put into place that when food is on its way to being not commercially purchased, that is directed to an area of people that need. And there's got to be a way to do that sustainably and healthy that doesn't wreck P&Ls and doesn't wreck the environment, but that actually gets the food to people that need it. And it's very food waste is probably one of my third biggest passion.
I agree. I was brought up by Depression era parents, so I empathize and share your passion on that. Question: we have a question that's come in about indoor farming. With thinking about the soil depletion and the need to help it, and limitations of land and feeding population, where does indoor farming fit in? Does that kind of move the needle, or how much? Michael, you want to start?
Sure. I think to me it's it actually is more about supply chain and transport of that food. And I think to me one of the things that's so cool about the up and coming in this indoor is that you can locate it in urban areas, and you can actually, at least on the vegetable side and such, you can be producing this stuff very close to where it's going to be consumed. And so you've got the whole transport piece. I mean, we've gotten so as a society, we fly stuff all over the place because we need blueberries off season, and we need bananas all year long and things. And the amount of food and the impact on the environment of just the supply chain side of this is just enormous. And I think what I like about the indoor farming move is, to me, one of the exciting aspects of it is moving that food closer to where it's going to be consumed, and then producing it in a very efficient way, high quality ways. I think it has huge potential, and I think ultimately it's going to be a real positive across the board.
Great. Anybody else?
I think that the quickest way to start promoting, I'm going to call it commercial local farming, is with indoor growing. I think that the easy route is greens. These giant commercial empty warehouses all over Chicago and Philadelphia that are sitting there dormant can be converted into amazing places to grow lettuce and kale and all sorts of things. And I think that let's just pick a segment at a time. And if you could grow the majority of your greens in a metro area in a warehouse under controlled conditions and do it organically, why not? I mean, that's healthy science. That's the direction we should be going, rather than coming up with a new chemical and a new pesticide to kill whatever bug came out last week. I think the idea of these elevator type, ultra, I can't think of the term, but ultraviolet light induced growing chambers. I think that's, if you really want to go local and you want to support people, it doesn't have to be 60 miles outside of Chicago. It could be downtown Chicago, and they should be eating those nutrient-dense greens raised right, instead of 150 miles from your home, it's blocks from your home. That can happen, and that's real, and it's out there. The technology's there. The funding needs to be there, and the passion, and it comes down to the consumer. I bring everything back to what I know, which is the beef industry. And 15 years ago, the organic grass-fed beef industry was laughed at. I mean, I sat down my first presentations with Cargill and JBS and guys like Bill Rupp, and they just laughed me out of their office, saying no one's going to pay $5.99 for a hamburger. It's stupid. Well, now conventional beef's as expensive, and grass-fed organics flying off the shelves, and no one can keep it in stock. I think the same thing's going to happen with local indoor greens being farmed in cities, and I think they should. I think that's a great place to put money and time.
We had another question here, which is interesting, and that's, how do we deal with the long adoption cycle that can take for new approaches here, and kind of what's the best way, I guess, to accelerate that and make it more economic? Elizabeth, any thoughts?
Nick, I'm not sure. I don't think I understand the question. When they're saying a long adoption cycle, what's the reference to? A farm or a product lifestyle, or what are we talking about?
Yeah, I think it's for a farm. Is how thinking about barriers to change. Can we talk more about the long adoption cycle for new approaches?
That's a really good question, because some I heard the expression Death Valley between let's say the year that conventional farmer wants to start farming organically and 3 years later when they're able to get their organic certification. So they're making this investment in their farm in order to achieve that certification or to meet whatever their regenerative agriculture goals are. And yet they're not getting compensated for that in the marketplace. That's a real issue. What you have is some interesting finance that's coming into the space to look at that question of how to support farmers. There's also supply chain issues. I mean, if you have a conventional grain grower who's growing grain and shipping it to outside the country for animal feed, and that grain we could change to grow, heritage and heirloom grains for a market that is really starting to be interested in those kinds of products. And yet the local grain mill that they go to can't identity preserve. They can't separate out those grains from the commodity grains that are coming through. And so there you have a whole infrastructure that's very expensive and complicated infrastructure that needs to be addressed. So again, you have NGOs and nonprofits and financial companies that are starting to take a look at these issues and infrastructure, but we can't expect farmers to move to more regenerative ag when they're the last person in the supply chain that receives the least amount of money and is taking all the risk in that transition, because if they have some weather event that wipes out their crop, they don't have the brand still paying them for those ingredients. So the person raises a very, very good question that there's not really a succinct answer to yet.
We have a little more than 5 minutes left, so a couple rapid fire questions and then maybe one to close. Scott, or Michael, sorry, there's one directed at you here. Can you comment on the importance of genetic modification in regenerative agriculture and sustainable food production more broadly, and the challenges that GMOs face with the current public perception?
So I think the short answer today is we don't know. We're pushing those barriers. We're looking at how much you can do. I mean, I think there's a growing number of examples where using that technology, entire crops or industries have been saved. If you look at papaya in Hawaii, the chestnut situation now. So we're finding more and more examples where that technology actually does bring an enormous benefit. And this is always going to be the combination that has to happen, right? People are going to look at and think about adopting new innovation or new approaches to things if the benefit's great enough. And that's really what we try to keep our eye on. So we try to focus on really big benefit projects. We're bringing it in an innovative way. 10 years from now, 20 years from now, how big a part of regenerative ag will engineered microbes be? I don't know. I hope, what we're trying to do is put them out there and show the benefit. Ultimately, the consumers will make the decisions by their adoption of the products. And that's part of the risk on our part, but it's also part of the fun of the challenge of bringing new innovation to try to solve big problems.
Thank you, Michael. Scott, one for you. Can you comment on the latest technology that transforms animal manure into water and fertilizer, and how will it help?
That transforms what? I missed that just a little bit.
Animal manure into water and fertilizer.
Wow, it's probably a little over my head. Animal manure into water fertilizer. I know that there's a lot of, there was at least 7 or 8 years ago, these anaerobic digesters creating power and creating generating electricity off of manure, and then that had a water waste, and that water waste component could be used for fertilizer for crops and stuff. But I don't know a ton about that. I'd really like to discover that. That's a great question.
Last question for the group. I know there's a lot of founders out there in the audience, who are growing their brands and evolving their mission. What should brands care about in regenerative agriculture, in thinking forward about how they're growing their businesses and dealing with supply chains and things like that? What kind of makes it easy, and what really adds the most value? Elizabeth, you want to start?
I would love to start, Nick, and I'm really glad you asked that question, because one of the things I get concerned with is when we talk about regenerative agriculture, there's all this doom and gloom and, oh my gosh, you have to support regenerative agriculture because the planet is going to come to an end and everybody's going to die. And I think that that isn't a very inspirational message. So I know we have a lot of food companies in the audience, and I want to tell a story. About 4 years ago, the American Journal of Wine Economics, which I think is a bunch of economists that just like to drink wine, but nonetheless, they do come out with some really interesting studies. And they asked a really simple question. The question they asked was, do eco-certified wines taste better than conventional wines? And they defined eco-certified as either wines made from organic grapes or biodynamic grapes. Now, the way they answered that question is they took a look at 70,000 California wines that were produced by over 4,000 different wineries that all were rated on 3 100-point scales. So for those people that are wine drinkers in the audience, they'll know Wine Spectator, Wine Enthusiast, Wine and Spirits, they all have these 100-point ratings. And they put all that data into the computer, and guess what they found out? They found out that eco-certified wines scored 4 to 5 points higher than conventional wines. Now, that's the difference between an 86 and a 90, or a 90 and a 95, which you wine drinkers out there know is a major spread. Why am I telling you this story? Because the number one reason brands should care about regenerative agriculture is it makes better products. No question. I love that study because I think it was really the first quantifiable study that connected the agricultural method to the product quality. So I really am happy to have the opportunity to leave people really with that thought.
Scott, Michael, any thoughts?
Go ahead, Michael.
No, I think it's again, I've been surprised just even the last couple of months, the amount of calls we get from folks producing different type of products, high-end products, asking about, like, can what we're doing be used on cotton, so that as they grow the cotton, they can put that on a shirt. They can, and I think the message in all this to me is that I said this in our we practiced for this, is that consumers are starting to care, and they want choice, and they want to be able to impact things, and in the same way that people now care how the fish they ate was caught, I think people are going to care about every aspect of the food they buy, and they're going to want to know how was it produced, and was it produced in a sustainable or environmentally sustainable way. And they're going to vote with their purchases. And I think it's very real, and I think it's happening right before our eyes. And I think everybody has to be aware of that up and down the whole supply chain.
Well, thank you very much. Oh, go ahead, Scott.
Your original question was what should brands worry about? What should they think about? And it's so simple. And I'm going to echo what Elizabeth said. And Michael's point was great too, is keeping it real, doing what you say you're doing. Don't stick that label or claim on your package just to sell shit. Excuse my language. Make it real. Have people dig into your supply chain. Show them. Take them to the farm. Take them to the plant. Make it real. That's the biggest thing brands can do. I agree with Elizabeth 1,000% that, listen, the biggest problem the organic wine and beef, probably a lot of organic segments have had in the last 10 years, is that it wasn't that great 10 years ago. 10 years ago, it was whatever would qualify. Let's get it out there. And in the beef industry, it was mostly dairy culls, because dairy culls producing milk. Hey, they're organic. Let's kill those and make them hamburger. Well, it didn't taste good. It was a 9-year-old dairy cow. That wouldn't taste good no matter what you did. But now that grain and feed and grass and everything can be certified organic, that we're creating a much higher quality product. Just like in wine, they're creating a better product. So the consumer used to say, oh, it's organic. Yeah, I'll try it. It wasn't a great experience, but now people are getting that experience and saying, God, this wine is much better. God, this fruit is much better. This produce, and the same thing is happening in proteins and beef and chicken, that you can walk into a grocery store and you can guarantee that your organic whole broiler chicken at Wegmans, wherever, it's going to be better than the conventional. You can guarantee that the grass-fed that's fed sustainably is going to taste richer and be better and have higher omega-3s. And it's real. It's not just something we're saying. Tastes better. And so I think the biggest thing brands could do is do what they say they're going to do and keep it real. And the consumers will, they're starting to realize that they're tasting it, they're feeling it. It just is better.
Thank you so much. We are out of time now.